Compared to the first wave of corrupted weapons, I think the ones added with the second batch are a lot more interesting. But how do they fare on Apocalypse? That's what we're here to find out today. Starting off is Corrupted Arbalest. This version of the weapon has 8 discs in the magazine, albeit with a slower fire rate and a little less primary fire damage. For what it's worth, it's also automatic. These discs, however, can only hit up to 2 enemies. Its mod, Guardian's Fury, reloads the weapon, increases its fire rate, reduces its recoil and sway, and causes explosions on enemies hit by the discs for 15 seconds. The mod is both a weapon buff and a mod damage attack. Right off the bat, I find this version of Arbalest way more fun to use. You don't have to worry about marking enemies, the damage is pretty solid, and the mod is still really good at clearing ads. The biggest downside of the weapon is the mod cost. At $12.50, it can take a little bit to charge it up, especially with the reduced disc bounces. For the build, I decided to invest into the mod. Archon Summoner, Detonation Trigger, Burden of the Destroyer, Soul Shard, Burden of the Sciolist, and this build's linchpin, Leaky Gemstone. You may be asking, why Soul Shard? Well, it's 15% all damage as long as you can have 3 summons out. Summoner gives us 1 in the form of Reaver, and for my secondary, I equipped the Knight's Guard mod. Before this video, I didn't know they counted as 2 summons. It makes sense there's 2 swords, but yeah, that's why I'm running Soul Shard. I also ran Kill Switch on it, just because I'd be swapping back to it every so often, and I thought might as well get some nice damage out of it. And for the Mutator on Corrupted Arbalest, I ran Bandit. The 2 hits per disc give you a pretty good chance of getting your ammo back. And I swear, when the mod was up, it felt like it was proccing even more. Pretty good stuff. There's a decent chance you'll never really have to manually reload. This near unending source of discs helps Leaking Gemstone give us our mod back by the time the mod is over. One thing to watch out for when using the weapon is the blast radius. It's pretty easy to stagger yourself, like with many other self-damaging weapons. The short and sweet of it, grab Kinship, grab Resolute, and that's all you really need. This weapon is good. Very, very good. Viable on Apocalypse, and just super fun to use. Next up is Corrupted Savior. It's almost identical to how it was in Remnant 1, with some slight changes to stats. But for the sake of explanation, here's how it works. The weapon is an automatic rifle. When the weapon has absolutely no mod power generated, it fires incredibly slow. As the weapon builds mod power, it increases very drastically. At 5 charges, it hits its maximum. Should you deal no damage for 5 seconds, the weapon will begin to lose mod power. This is supposed to encourage the player to always be on the hunt, deal damage, but it kinda just feels a little unnecessary, at least in my opinion. The mod itself is Fusion Cannon. It's exactly the same as it was in the first game. It fires a giant beam that penetrates enemies and deals damage based on how many charges were consumed. This beam can weak spot hit, however it only has a 50% weak spot damage bonus. Using the mod does mean you'll be set back to the initial very slow fire rate. Because of this, you're kind of split as to which side to invest in, like with most weapons that have a built-in damaging mod. Although in this case it's a lot more severe since using the mod penalizes your primary fire. In my case, I chose to invest into the primary fire, albeit not in a conventional sense. Alchemist Gunslinger. Originally I was using Sidewinder, but ended up going with Bulletstorm down the line. Nightmare Spiral, Bloodless King's Vow, Hardcore Metal Band, Alchemy Stone, and Tear of Lydusa. I ran Nebula just to have some corrosive, as well as Swarm, and for the Mutator, I settled on Extender. I also picked Profane Heart as well as invested into Leech and Siphoner. My thought process behind the build was, since the weapon hits a lot, might as well try to leech off of it. And as expected, when you stack this much leech on anything really, yeah, it works pretty well. For my concoctions, I ran Elixir, Blood Vapor, whatever that one's called, Dark Cider, and Meat Shake. To ensure that I would never have any problems ever from anything, I made sure to pop confidence boosters. If you wanted, you could drop Hardcore Metal Band and get some more leech or damage, then swap out Frenzy Dust for Stone Skin. You may have noticed I only put 6 points into Kinship. What's up with that? As it turns out, for those unaware, if you put 7 or more points into Kinship, self-applied dots no longer deal damage. At least not significant enough damage for sources like Hardcore Metal Band to proc off of. By putting in just 6 points, you can technically always have sources like Hardcore Metal Band maxed out while taking very, very minimal damage. It's basically nothing. The Grey Health regen pretty much surpasses any sort of burn damage you would take. It's also the reason why I'm running Alchemy Stone. Is this build super powerful? No. Is it bad? No. It's just a build where you stand still. It is just basically Bleedos. You stand still, you shoot. If you don't stop shooting, you'll never die. This setup gives you almost exactly the max 80% DR cap. For this setup, you just never use the mod. I mean, you could, but you really shouldn't, at least in this setup. If I could change one thing about the weapon, I would probably give it back its 50 mag size. I feel like that was one thing that didn't really need changing. I almost completely forgot to mention too, when you fire the mod, the weapon's magazine will actually be reloaded by 20% per charge consumed. It's kinda nice. It could probably also just be the weapon gets reloaded on mod use of any charge amount. Not that you probably really want to be using the mod when it's not fully charged, but you do you. Like many other weapons where you have to make a choice on which side of the weapon to invest into, it's fine, especially if you build for the mod side. It could probably have a full 100% weak spot damage bonus as well. Probably doesn't need to be limited in that sense. Maybe there could be some sort of calculation where if there's multiple enemies it does reduced weak spot damage or something, or I don't know. Fun weapon, definitely one you could use on Apocalypse. Coming up is Corrupted Cube Gun. Despite being wildly different, it's actually still pretty similar. It's a cube shooting heat-based SMG, although the cubes here are huge, and the heat generation is way more. These cubes are like smaller, faster versions of the ones fired by the mod of regular cube gun. They pass through enemies, can't weak spot hit, and they can kind of go through terrain. Not too much, there's definitely a limit as to how much of the cubes can go within terrain before despawning. At base, the weapon can fire 5 shots without overheating. Its mod makes a 5-meter cube that increases heat decay by 50%, reduces heat generation by 15%, and generates reserve ammo for those inside of it for 15 seconds. The size of the cube is affected by both amplitude and magnifying glass. Right off the bat, one thing I find kind of sad about the mod is that using it doesn't even give you one more shot fired with the gun. Like, really? 15%? That's pretty small. Especially when sources like Microcompressor or Ingenuity give 30% less heat generation. The cubes are still kinda nice to have. Their size allows you to hit multiple adds at once with them, and it's still technically unlimited ammo, even if you can't get too many shots off per burst. It is certainly a lot harder to feather the heat, which makes using constant variable ring just not really worth it. I kinda wish the cubes moved slower. I know that kinda sounds weird. If they moved slower, but were able to tick multiple times per enemy being hit by it inside of the cube, I think that could be really good. One more bit of information. The ammo regen by the mod appears to be about 1.6% reserve ammo per second. This of course does stack with sources that give you additional reserve ammo, resulting in even faster bullet generation. So what kind of build do you do for a gun like this? Well, I've opted to do nothing. And by that I mean we build not around the gun, but another gun. You see, the ammo regen is actually pretty good. Obviously, it's a lot of work. You gotta put the bullets in the magazine yourself, you might even have to use an ammo box. However, what if I told you there was a way to make those bullets magically enter the magazine? Allow me to introduce to you Transpose. By just having this little thing attached to your gun, all you have to do is stand in the big red cube and those bullets just come flowing in. You ain't gotta worry about nothing. In all seriousness, this is the setup I'm using. Hunter, Gunslinger, Gunslinger's Charm, Microcompressor, Braided Thorns, Provisioner's Ring, and Zoe's Ring. For Corrupted Cube Gun's Mutator, I picked Supercharger, because yes, this is technically a charge weapon. When going to shoot the gun, there is a little tiny charge up time. It's worth noting charge speed only applies to the initial charge up. Each shot after is not affected by charge speed, and is instead affected by fire rate, although you still get that 15% crit chance boost from Supercharger. For my primary weapon, there's 2 you could pick here, Buzzsaw or Plasma Cutter. In my case, I went with Buzzsaw, Transpose obviously being my mutator of choice. For fragments, I picked fire rate, crit chance, and crit damage. The rotation is just set up the cube and go to town. You pretty much never have to reload ever. When you swap off back to Corrupted Cube Gun, Provisioner's Ring is reloading your mag for you. Once you charge the mod back up, just repeat the cycle. And this setup is actually really fun. You could totally do this with non-heat based weapons, although you'd be getting less value from the mod because you wouldn't have any of the heat stuff going on. Does this count as Apocalypse Ready? I guess it's kind of in the same vein as Corrupted Rune Pistol, or even regular Rune Pistol, where they're just supportive tools. Like, you can use it as a weapon. It's not amazing as a weapon, but this is technically something you can do with it on Apocalypse that does have good results. Next up is Corrupted Nebula. This version of the weapon is a semi-auto laser gun. Weak spot hits and kills create nanoswarms that last 8 seconds and home in on targets within 20 meters. You can have a max of 5 of these swarms out at once. I also noticed this while recording, and I verified my file, so I don't believe it's just a me problem. The weapons card mod damage is just wrong. It's showing triple of what it's supposed to be. It seems as if it's taking the power level of my character and multiplying the base damage from the card to it. So originally, I thought this was because of the player's power level being taken into account or something, but then I went back and tested on a character who wasn't PL 20, and the same issue persisted. I have no clue what is causing this weird visual bug. It's there, just thought I'd let you know. The mod detonates any active swarms out for 300 acid damage, as well as an additional 75 per nanoswarm active, within a 2-meter radius. Since you'll always have at least one swarm out when you detonate, the base damage is actually 375. These detonated swarms apply a small corrosive dot for 10 seconds. The very small blast radius can occasionally lead to smaller targets not always being caught in the blast due to their erratic movement. You might also notice that occasionally one of your blasts is dealing less damage than the rest. That's because the blast from the first one, on a non-corroded target, is not gaining the 10% bonus damage from the status effects. So that actually means that all subsequent blasts beyond the first one all deal 10% more damage. Even with nothing else going for it, no archetypes boosting it, no damage rings, it's pretty good. I was mobbing through Losum in the Fey area, and man, I was really surprised by just how easily you can just destroy stuff with this on a base level. The only thing, besides the small blast radius of the swarms, is that when you use the mod, it really feels like it should reload the weapon. I don't want to say, oh yeah, just throw it on there, give it to it, because it is really powerful. If I could secretly make one selfish change, it would probably be giving the weapon an auto reload on mod activation. This was my build. Archon Ritualist, Effluvium Enhancer, Acid Stone, Alumni Ring, Digested Hog Lure, and Burden of the Destroyer. For the mutator, I went with feedback. I wanted to have the mod as frequent as I could. Since you max out on your swarms after 5 weak spot hits, I wanted to make sure that by that 5th shot, I would have the mod back up. And holy shit, I didn't think the weapon was this strong. Like, I figured it was going to be really powerful from my initial testing with it. Just watch how I absolutely destroy Faerun. Within 2 uses of the mod, he's already at basically half HP. Were I a better player, I could probably one-phase him. Of course, the weapon isn't always 100% consistent. Even on certain big enemies, the way the wisps move, and I don't know if this is the case before they buffed the movement speed of them, sometimes the wisps, when they're orbiting around a target, just fly a little too far outside of the radius of the blast. If the swarms would hover closer to enemies constantly all the time, yeah, this thing would be an absolute menace to society, in a good way. The weapon is also not the best pick against bosses or enemies that don't have weak spots. However, those are few and far between, so go nuts. Last but not least is Corrupted Sorrow. This version of the weapon has a lot going on. At the end of the day, it's still a hand crossbow. The most significant difference between this and the original is the bolts and how they interact with the mod. Firstly, these ones only last 6 seconds, whereas the originals last 10. They also aren't called back to the player on mod activation. Instead, they're consumed, launching a homing attack for each one. Unlike base Sorrow, bolts lodged in the environment will not create a homing attack. Should you land all 10 bolts on a single target, you'll deal 3000 damage on mod activation. At a base level, this is incredibly powerful. You also have the option of shooting your allies. The weapon does no friendly fire damage, and on mod activation, every bolt lodged inside of your friends will instead send healing orbs towards them for 10% of their max HP per orb. I'd say this is definitely a last resort sort of heal. Since the bolts only last 6 seconds, you can't really keep them in your friends or allies for too long. It's a shoot 'em and use 'em sort of deal. The weapon is obviously a little weaker in some stats compared to the original, but that's because you have all of this potential mod damage you can deal. It also doesn't have the self-sustain in both ammo refund and health regen, but if you have a lot of ammo boxes and don't get hit a lot, this is pretty much a straight upgrade. In some situations, mainly in a mod build, you could build this for the primary fire, although I would just stick with the regular Sorrow if you wanted to do that sort of setup. Despite what some may say, I still really think that Sorrow is a good handgun. Even if the damage potential of Corrupted Sorrow is higher, it doesn't mean that the base version is bad. One has a lot of damage, the other has significantly less damage, but better sustain. Oh yeah, Corrupted Sorrow's mod also doesn't deal explosive damage. For my setup, I ran Archon Challenger. My trinkets were Golden Ribbon, Digested Hog Lure, Burden of the Gambler, Braided Thorns, and Burden of the Destroyer. For the Mutator, I settled on Failsafe. I figured you kinda want to get as many bolts into an enemy as possible before activating the mod, and with Archon, you should have it charged by the time you land that 10th bolt. For my fragments, I ran mod damage, fire rate, and mod and skill cast speed. The reason why I went with Challenger instead of something like Summoner was for Rampage. The biggest issue with trying to build for a mod damage setup is trying to work in, reloading and all that. And since Rampage helps with both fire rate and reload speed, I figured, why not? Once Rampage is charged, you do get that free reload. That allows you to basically get about 20 bolts in one mod activation, which is exceedingly devastating. As you can see, it's a lot of damage, and when you land multiple crits in a row, oh boy. It deals so much damage, you can absolutely afford to put 1 or 2 bolts into some adds in case you're desperate to take some out. I don't have much else to say, it's an insanely powerful weapon. Out of curiosity, I did use almost the exact same build with regular Sorrow on a couple bosses for some time comparisons, and at least in my case, I'm not a super efficient or amazing player, let's be honest, but I found my time with Sorrow to be pretty much the same as Corrupted Sorrow. Corrupted Sorrow has those big chunks of damage you can deal to a boss in one mod activation. After that though, you have to reload the gun, rebuild up the mod, and eventually get more ammo. And if you take damage from anything, you'll have to use a relic, a consumable, a skill, maybe wait up with some passive health regen. But with regular Sorrow, you pretty much never have to reload outside of the first magazine, as long as you're landing most of your shots. This results in your DPS not really faltering too often. So while, yeah, you're not getting those big numbers that you would with Corrupted Sorrow, with base Sorrow, you're gonna have a pretty smooth time. That's just my 2 cents. Let me know what you think. Which Sorrow do you prefer? That's 10 out of presumably 15 corrupted weapons, but we'll see what they do. I definitely think I like this batch of corrupted weapons more so than the first one. The weapons here feel a little more wackier, less derivative of their original versions. Next time I'll be covering the weapons from the Forgotten Kingdom DLC. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.